see if I can do. Okay. Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for being here. Welcome to the November 2024 meeting of the Philadelphia Association for Critical Thinking. We support science, reason, and the thorough investigation of claims using the scientific method, which is exactly what today's speaker will discuss. Our speaker, and if you have a big screen, she is right now up in the upper left-hand corner, Dr. Melanie Trecek-King. She is Associate Professor of Biology at Massasoit. How did I do? Massasoit? You're still not.
Massasoit.
Massasoit. Okay. I couldn't quite hear that. Community College, like she said, who will talk about FLOTER, which is her technique for evaluating claims and making informed decisions. But first, a little bit of information about our Zoom. There is a chat icon at the bottom of your screen. You can type questions in anytime. Please type a capital Q in front of your question to distinguish it. And as I scroll through the questions at the end of the meeting, I'll be able to find them. The Q&A will be at the end of the talk. So, Melanie, the screen is yours. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here. I wish I could see you all, but hello. Also, I need to apologize in advance. My cat Dimitri has decided that it is time to bother me. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen. And okay, are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I should start by saying my background is I'm a plant ecologist from the Midwest, and I moved out to Massachusetts with my
Melanie, your sound is off.
community college, and I love community college. It taught me so much over the. I'm not sure what to do about that. Is this any better?
Yes, that is.
I'm going to suggest you turn off your video.
Turn off my video.
It'll improve your network bandwidth a little bit.
How do I do that?
On the lower left, there's a little button with a video camera. That's it. That'll reduce your network demands. You can turn it back on when you're done sharing your screen.
Okay,
We won't
so
be able to see you, but we can hear you, and it won't be freezing up like it was.
I apologize for that. I am not technologically capable. So the floater toolkit came from my background as teaching general biology to people who don't want to be scientists when they grow up. And I realized that I was spending a lot of time trying to help them understand things. I was helping them understand the findings of science as opposed to the process of science. And I stumbled upon a Carl Sagan quote, and I'm going to paraphrase him here. He said, if we teach only the findings of science without teaching science's method, then how can the average person distinguish between science and pseudoscience? And so what I decided to do was design a course to replace general biology, and it focuses exclusively on how we know things, how we individually know things, how the process of science is better than our individual ways. And so I focus now on teaching skills, not facts. Those skills are critical thinking, information literacy, and science literacy. And importantly, it is in that order, because I want students to understand how they think before they evaluate information and science. Because the reasons we don't accept good information isn't necessarily that information, but ourselves. And so I designed this course, and I was asking students to evaluate claims, and I realized that I would give them claims and just say, well, critically think through this claim, and they were kind of stumped. Where do you start? And so I designed this toolkit to help them evaluate claims. There are a lot of claims out there. I tend to start with really silly things like butt sunning or drinking urine, or there's poop masks. I mean, there's all kinds of. I am no longer surprised at what people will believe or not believe. Nevertheless, average person is constantly scrolling through social media feeds and just online feeds in general. And if you don't stop and ask yourself what you're seeing and how reliable is that information, then it all looks the same. Like the average is supported by evidence and what isn't. So the goal for students is to evaluate these claims. And the solution that I came up with is this Floater Toolkit. If you scan this here, or if you just go to my website, thinkingispower.com, there is an article and a bunch of resources built around this toolkit. The News Literacy Project did a lesson based on it. I have recorded videos and lots of supporting resources. So what I'm going to do is talk about each of the rules of the Floater Toolkit to help you understand how to think through claims. Now, before we start, the most important first steps before you evaluate any claim is to first be skeptical. I'm preaching to the choir here. I fully understand that, but skepticism is misunderstood by a lot of people. Skepticism to some means just, I'm not going to accept something. And skepticism is, I like David Hume's definition. A wise man proportions his belief to the evidence. Again, I'm paraphrasing. But what we want to do is sit in the Goldilocks zone between, we want to ask questions and demand evidence, but then accept those claims proportional to the evidence that's available. So first, we want to be skeptical, because if we don't listen to that part of our brain that says, wait, is that true? Then we won't actually evaluate claims, right? So first, stop and listen to the part of your brain and go, let's evaluate this. The next important thing here is that we should define terms. A silly side story here, but for about a couple of years, so I'm a fellow at the Center for Inquiry, and one of the their education director, Bertha Vasquez, and I have had an ongoing conversation about critical thinking. And I said that we should teach critical thinking. And she kept saying, Melanie, we do teach critical thinking. And it took us about 2 years to realize that we had different definitions of that word, that term. So I violated my own rule here. We can all fall prey to this. We make assumptions about what things mean without actually asking. So let's start. Step one is falsifiability. In that it has to be possible to think of evidence that would disprove the claim. I find, so falsifiability is key to the process of science. Scientific claims have to be falsifiable. And if they're not falsifiable, then they're not part of science. It doesn't mean that they're not true. It does mean, though, that we'll never be able to know with evidence. Before I go into these different rules of what makes claims unfalsifiable, I just want to dwell here on, think about some of the things that we fight about a lot. Our ongoing disagreements, some of the things that we feel really strongly about and we go to war about. Those things tend to be identity-based, values-based, supernatural. And because of that, they're not evidence-based. So we're constantly fighting about them because there's actually no way to prove them wrong. Now, if they are truly unfalsifiable, so they're not evidence-based, it doesn't mean that they're not true. It doesn't mean that they're not important, but it does mean that we should resist the urge to try and support our beliefs with evidence, because we can't prove them wrong with evidence. So I found that falsifiability is a really difficult concept. So I've broken down why things are unfalsifiable. The first is supernatural forces. This here is Pythagoras, and I'm sure you all know who Pythagoras was. Now, Pythagoras was obviously a really smart guy. He also thought that when you ate beans, you lost your, no, he thought that when you farted, you lost your soul. Right, so he was afraid to eat beans. Okay, now I tell my students this, and it is so funny because literally every time I tell them this, they all start laughing, and I'll say, test this claim. And they look at me like, wait, what? No, seriously, test this claim. When you fart, you lose your soul. And almost every time the conversation goes something like, do I lose my soul when I burp too? I don't know. You tell me, you're testing this. Well, my dog farts. Does my dog have a soul? I don't know, right? You tell me. Recently, one of the students said, if somebody else farts and I breathe it in, do I get their soul? Okay. Supernatural claims tend to be amongst the most important beliefs to some people, but they're not part of science. If we start with God and really important claims, then it could trigger people. One of my favorite things to do when I teach these things with misinformation is to start with non-triggering examples. No one is triggered by farts. We all think it's funny. So eventually one of my students will say, well, what's a soul? We measure a soul. And that's not science. Could it be true? Could you really lose your soul when you farted? I suppose, but we'll never know that for sure. Now, in a more salient example, this is a form of energy healing. So energy healing is things like Reiki and even acupuncture and chiropractic. Here it says things like it optimizes the human condition and transforms organisms and non-living material at the atomic, molecular, and of course cellular structures. This doesn't say anything, but also what's a human biofield? Energy is measurable and observable, and we use it in medicine in the form of things like X-rays and MRIs. Energy and energy healing is none of those things. It is a supernatural force. Actually, some Reiki practitioners will say that when you fart during a Reiki session, you're actually cleansing your sacral chakra, which sounds very similar to Pythagoras' claim. The point here is that if it's making a supernatural claim, it is not evidence-based. That said, there are supernatural claims that can be falsified. If somebody says they can control supernatural abilities like bending spoons, this is Uri Geller, right? Well, fine, we can test that. You're claiming to manipulate the physical universe. Spoiler alert, he can't actually use his mind to bend spoons. It's a trick, as James Randi did a great job debunking. On a more important example to a lot of people is things like a global flood called Noah's flood. Now, a global flood would lead, right? We should be able to measure, to test, to collect evidence globally from a flood. We don't have that evidence, but let's pretend that we did, right? Let's say that there was evidence for a global flood. We could not test God as a cause for the flood. So the difference is, where is the supernatural claim? And that's where we draw the line for something that can't be falsified. So that's the first type. The next is the vague claims. These are so vague that they just lack any meaning. They don't make specific predictions. They can't be tested. Horoscopes are a great example of things that are so vague. Like if I said you have a need to be liked and admired by people, you've wondered whether you've done or said the right things. I mean, it's so vague, and actually it applies to nearly everyone. Those are called Barnum statements. In health, there's a by definition, things that like alternative medicine cannot make specific claims. Supplements, sorry, by law cannot make specific health claims. So what they'll do instead is, boosts the immune system, improves mental state. That seems awesome, but it actually doesn't say anything. And this is the power of vague statements. Vague statements allow us to impart what we want or don't want to believe on them. So when we're evaluating claims, we need to evaluate it based on what it actually claims and not our interpretation of those claims. Subjective claims. Here's my cat, Dimitri. would hold that cats make the best pets. Right now, I'm objectively correct about this. Cats are awesome. Cats are, I would say, quiet, but he's being really loud right now. They're self-cleaning. I'm in Massachusetts. When it's cold and snowy on a February morning and dark, I don't have to take him outside to go to the bathroom. I have evidence for those claims, but it's still an opinion. Now, again, think about the kinds of subjective beliefs that we have, our feelings, our identity needs, our morals and values. These are not evidence-based in the way that we can test the physical universe. They are certainly important. And we really want these to be true. So we tend to collect evidence and build shields around but they're not advocating here when we're evaluating these statements and claims, is that we recognize the difference between something that's evidence-based and something that's not evidence-based. If it's not, put it into that bucket and don't use evidence to try and support them. The last one is ad hoc excuses. This is when a claim is actually falsifiable, but we so want it to be true that we use excuses to protect it. But what about? We're moving the goalposts. Conspiracy theorists are masters at this. By definition, conspiracy theories are immune to evidence. All evidence is interpreted to be part of the conspiracy. Missing evidence was covered up. Evidence that would disprove the conspiracy was planted. There's always an excuse. That's not how evidence works. We need to actually follow the evidence to a conclusion. There are conspiracies, of course, but conspiracy theories are different than conspiracies. Okay, so that's F. Let's say the claim is falsifiable. Now we're going to move on to logic. Is this a logical claim? Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into the different types of arguments, but to understand what the conclusion and the supporting evidence are is an important first step. I said that sentence backwards, but you know what I mean. We want to break down the argument into what the claim is and what the evidence for that claim is. The different kinds of arguments are largely, their key difference is the level of support that they provide for the conclusion. Some are provide conclusive support and some provide probabilistic support, and knowing the difference is important. But once we have the argument down and the type of argument, the next important step is, does it commit logical fallacies? Now, logical fallacies are errors in reasoning that can cause us to fall for false claims. Now, just because an argument commits a fallacy does not mean that it's a false argument. And there's also about a gazillion fallacies, and that's a problem because there's just too many to learn. And they're really nuanced. That said, in the Floater Toolkit, I've identified about a dozen fallacies that if you learn to spot them, it can help you at least identify characteristics of the vast majority of misinformation. So for example, the appeal to nature. This is really common in things like alternative medicine, health and wellness, food and diet, beauty. It's natural, so it's better, or that's unnatural, so we should reject it. The problem is, what is natural? It's actually difficult to define, and there's all kinds of natural things that are pretty bad for us. Okay, so the appeal to nature, the appeal to tradition. It's been around for a long time, so it must be true. Things that have been around for a long time may be around for a long time because they actually work, but in which case we should have evidence to support it as opposed to just saying that, this is how we've always done it. The appeal to authority is that a claim is true because of an assumed authority. This is sometimes referred to as the appeal to false authority because we're talking usually about people who are outside of their area of expertise. Accepting a consensus is not an appeal to authority, and science has experts, not authorities, and so they should be able to provide evidence for their claims. This one's kind of dicey, but if somebody says it's true because of who I am, then that This one is so common. Sometimes one is confusing correlation with causation. Like one thing happened and another thing happened, so they must be related in some way. The human brain is constantly looking for patterns and trying to figure out causality. And so it's human nature to say, well, I did this and then this happened, so there must be a causal relationship. And sometimes there is, but sometimes there's not. And sometimes it's just a coincidence or there's something else behind it. The point is, we need to make sure that we're not confusing correlation and causation. The ad hominem, this one is really common in science denial, pseudoscience, and conspiracy theories. In this case, it's attacking the source of an argument instead of the actual argument. And in science, this tends to be scientists are greedy shills that are in it for the money, so they can't be trusted. What I find fascinating is that this often is coming from people, like someone will say that a leading vaccinologist or immunologist is a greedy shill for big pharma. But so instead, we need to buy supplements from somebody who is worth tens of millions of dollars. If you want to know who that is, I'm sure you can look it up or let me know privately. I will tell you. Nevertheless, it's usually a deflection technique to try to discredit real science while supporting things that are not science-based. And strawman arguments are key to science denial. One of the best ways to defeat strongly supported scientific conclusions is to misrepresent the conclusion itself. By misrepresenting the science, it is so much easier to appear to defeat it. So, logical fallacies. Here is an example. We should ban GMOs. They aren't natural. Millions oppose them. Our ancestors didn't eat them. Food allergies have increased with GMOs. And scientists are shills for Monsanto. Okay, so if we were able to talk to each other, I would ask you these questions. But first, the conclusion here is that we should ban GMOs. All of the other sentences are premises or support for the conclusion. The problem is every single one of these premises commits a fallacy. So they aren't natural. There's an appeal to nature. Millions oppose them. That's an appeal to the masses. Our ancestors didn't eat them. That's an appeal to tradition. Food allergies have increased with GMO use. That's mistaking correlation for causation. And scientists are shills from Monsanto is an ad hominem. So being able to spot these fallacies can help us understand if an argument is logical. Buried in the middle of floater is the hardest rule, and it is objectivity. This is, we have to be honest with ourselves. Richard Feynman famously said, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. No one can fool us like we can. So what tends to happen is we jump to a conclusion. We think we follow evidence to a conclusion and evaluate it logically. And then, of course, our beliefs are true because we're really smart and we follow the evidence. But usually what happens is we jump to a conclusion based on our motivations and emotions and desires and biases and tribal identity and so on. And once we get there, we use confirmation bias to find evidence to support what we want to believe. Motivated reasoning, this is what we want or don't want to believe. So we, again, find evidence or find ways to discount evidence. And as a result, we are overconfident in our position. Have you ever tried to talk to somebody who is actually wrong and you know they are wrong, yet they are really confident that they are right? Daniel Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow and won a Nobel Prize, was once asked if he had a magic wand that could rid the world of anything, what would it be? And he said overconfidence. You cannot learn if you are confident that you're right. Now, the problem is once our beliefs are attached to our identity, they're part of our worldview, they're central to how we see ourselves and present ourselves to the world. Threats to those beliefs are almost seen as threats to us. So we go to war to defend them. This is why this is so hard. This rule is asking us to be honest with ourselves. We think we follow evidence to a conclusion, right? We think we use the body of evidence, use reasoning and logic, and get to a conclusion, when most of the time we're rationalizing. We jump to that desired conclusion, and then we use motivated reasoning and confirmation bias to cherry pick low quality evidence, and then we're confident that we're right. Whenever, so I communicate critical thinking and science a lot online these days, and I hear a lot about people wanting to be independent thinkers, and I understand where they're coming from, and it is certainly something to aspire to. But to me, true independent thinking means knowing yourself enough to know what your vulnerabilities are so that you don't fall for misinformation. The textbook examples of this in science are science denial and pseudoscience. So these are like two sides of the same coin. Science denial is motivated by not wanting to accept a strongly supported scientific conclusion, usually because it conflicts with our values or identity, our emotions. Okay, so we don't want to believe, and so we set an impossibly high standard of evidence to accept it. Well, it's just a theory. I'll believe it when science has proven it. I need more evidence. And that seems scientific. It seems like what something a skeptic would do, but actually there's no evidence that would cause somebody to accept these conclusions because they're not being honest with themselves. Conversely, pseudoscience is motivated by wanting to believe. And because we want to believe, we set a very low standard of evidence. Now, both of these often play on each other. Let me show you an example. This is from a science textbook in the Atlanta area. It is no longer there, thankfully. But notice how they've presented evolution and creation. So evolution denial is a form of science denial, not wanting to accept evolution because of identity needs and emotions and what it would mean, what it implies for us and our place in the world. And because we don't want to accept evolution, we have a problem because we have a strongly supported scientific theory that we're denying. And so we have to replace it with something. And the thing we replace it with is creationism, pseudoscience. And because we want to believe that, our standard of evidence is very low. But notice both of these are playing on each other. When we don't want to accept something, we'll accept something else. So we tend to be deny something and need very high levels of evidence, and then we're very gullible in other areas. It's all in service of what we want or don't want to believe. Okay, now that we're being honest with ourselves, let's consider other ways of explaining an observation. This is homeopathy. And again, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but homeopathy, I have found the vast majority of people just have no idea what this is. And so when you explain to somebody what it actually is, most people go, wait, really? So homeopathy is based on the premise that whatever causes a symptom in a healthy person will cure someone with those symptoms. So for example, if I want to go to sleep, I can't sleep. Coffee keeps people awake, so coffee should help me sleep. But only if we dilute it until there's none of it left. So 30C there means 31% dilutions. So a 1% solution of coffee, take that, put it in 1% of another 99 and so on until there's literally none of it left. And homeopaths will claim that the reason this still works is because the water remembers the vibrations of the molecules that were in it. Now that makes no sense, right? But let's say somebody tried this when they couldn't sleep and they slept. Well, it worked for me. Obviously, homeopathy works. I suppose it could be, although this would violate everything that we know about chemistry and physics. But let's try explaining this in other ways. So let's brainstorm other ways and then apply Occam's razor. So Occam's razor is a wonderful tool, but it tends to be misused. So Occam's razor is not the simplest explanation necessarily. It is the explanation that requires the fewest new assumptions, is the most likely. So it is very unlikely that coffee would help us sleep. this does not pass Occam's razor. Let me show you another example. I love the crop circles. These crop circles started to appear in England in the 70s and 80s. And they took off. They were cereologists, which are apparently experts that study crop circles, and ufologists, of course. And they all had decided that these were made by UFOs taking off and landing in these crop fields overnight. So we have two explanations here. We have an explanation that aliens made the crop circles. And then we have another explanation that humans made the crop circles. The aliens made the crop circle explanation requires huge new assumptions in that we don't know aliens exist, and we don't know that they have traveled to Earth, and we don't know that the only thing they do is make fun shapes in crops. We do, however, know that humans are fully capable of making crop circles. So the first explanation does not pass Occam's razor. Now, the reason I really love this example is because, on his deathbed, these two gentlemen here, let me back up. The two of them were having beers at the pub on the weekends. And one of them was like, you know what? I saw these crop circles in Australia. I think we should go out and make them. One of them was an artist. So they took these boards and pivots and started to make circles. And they were having a good time with it. But then they weren't getting much attention. So they started putting the circles in areas with more people and then calling the media. And then even trolling the media and the cereologists and the ufologists when they showed up to investigate. So the media would be out there with the crop circles, and the cereologists would be talking about UFOs taking off and landing. And these guys were, just in there for the fun of it. One weekend, actually, one of their wives said, I know you say you're going to the pub with your friend on the weekend, but I see the miles on your car, and you are not going to the pub. Where are you going? And he said, they promised not to tell anybody. One of them said, you know what? Actually, those crop circles you've been seeing in the news? We did those. She's like, you are pulling my leg. He says, no. Really, draw a crop circle. So he had her draw crop circles on some paper. And guess what was on the front page of the paper the next weekend? So these two had a grand time doing it and fooling everybody in the process. So we know humans are capable of doing it. The point here is to not get attached to the first explanation, especially the explanation that we want to believe, and instead propose other ways of explaining it, and then doing our best to try and disprove those other explanations until there's one standing that is the most likely. Okay, the tentative conclusions. This is a conclusion can change with new evidence. Science is never settled. All conclusions are inherently tentative to a certain degree, but some conclusions are much more supported than others. As a science communicator, I'm constantly facing issues with the word theory, because in everyday language, that means a guess. It means that we don't know and we're just proposing something. But in science, it means an explanation that is supported by a vast amount of evidence. It's as good as we're going to get for explanations. So in this graphic here, I'm trying to show that our explanations with more evidence gain more certainty, but we never reach absolute proof. Science isn't a process of reaching certainty. It is a process of reducing uncertainty. There is always a chance that we're wrong. This here is Cranky Uncle, which is an absolutely fabulous game. I strongly encourage you all to play it. It is free. It's by John Cook, the founder of the website Skeptical Science, which is like the best climate change reference online. In this game, you are Cranky Uncle, who is a science denier, and he uses this techniques of science denial to try to convince you, usually that climate change isn't real. And as you piss him off, he gets crankier and crankier, and you get more cranky points, and then you unlock new levels. But science denial is science denial demands an impossible level of proof. It is one of the key characteristics of science denial. It's just a theory. Well, there's no climate change. Look, it's snowing. All of those are demanding a level of proof that is impossible to reach because it's motivated by not wanting to accept those conclusions. So this rule is reminding us that all conclusions are tentative to a certain degree, but at some point, not accepting them becomes denial. The evidence rule has three parts. Is it reliable? Is it comprehensive? And is it sufficient? So reliability refers to how it was collected. Like, where does the source of the evidence? What is the consensus? The evidence pyramid I have here shows levels of scientific evidence and their quality. So individual studies are less reliable than meta-analyses and systematic reviews. And the best we can get are things like consensus reports. Those are the filtering experts filtering all of the evidence and coming up with here's what we know at the time. If this is coming from, if a form of evidence is coming from a source that is known to be unreliable, if it is conflicting with a consensus, if it was not reliably collected, then those are all red flags. Comprehensive refers to the body of evidence, meaning are we cherry picking? I love this example. So we all know that water is essential for life, so much so that whenever we go to other planets to try to find evidence of living things, we look for evidence of liquid water. But if I tried to convince you that water was not good for us, I could say water is the leading cause of drowning. 100% of people exposed to water will die. 100% of serial killers have admitted to drinking water. These are all true facts. They're all true. But what I've done here, what this meme is so wonderfully done, is cherry-picked pieces of evidence so that we are led astray about the overall body of evidence about liquid water. Cherry-picking is really difficult because it's usually motivated by a desire to come to a conclusion. So there's the objectivity rule. And then what happens is the cherry-picked facts can actually be facts. So it is evidence. And we even feel justified accepting something because we have evidence. There is the single study syndrome that is pretty well known in science. You need to be careful. The news really likes the new things. That's what the news is. And so like a new study on the fringe comes out and says, well, here's new evidence of this. And so there's a breakthrough. Scientists say we were wrong. This changes everything. Be really wary of a single study. A single study in science is never the final answer. And then the last thing about evidence is that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and anecdotes are never sufficient. My anecdote, when I was a kid, I was about 5 or 6 maybe, I saw a ghost. So my grandma was sleeping, she was staying over and sleeping in bed next to me, and I woke up to a fingernail going up my arm, like really slowly. To this day, I will not sleep with my arms outside the covers because of this, right? So I felt this fingernail and I opened my eyes and I saw this old woman, and she had long, straggly white hair. And I tried to yell to my grandma to wake her up, and she put a hand over my mouth. And I still, like, it was cold and clammy and wrinkly. And so I tried to yell louder to my grandma, and she put another hand on my chest. And I have no idea how long that lasted, but I was terrified. To this day, if I did not know any better, I could look at you with a straight face and say, I know ghosts are real because I saw one. And I did. Now, what tends to happen, I'm sure some of you know what this is. This is sleep paralysis. So sleep paralysis is when your brain wakes up, but your body has not yet woken up. So there's a when you're sleeping, your brain turns off the signals to your muscles. You don't want to act out what's happening in your dreams. But in this case, there's some sort of mix up. And so your body can't move and your brain has a problem because it can't move. And so it's trying to explain what's happening. And so it jumps to the best explanations that it knows. It uses its existing information, its beliefs and so on, to jump to an explanation. This is why history is full of paintings of like demons and succubi and ghosts and so on people's chest. In my case, my 5-year-old brain, the thing I could think of was the witch from Snow White and Seven Dwarfs. She was terrifying, right? But I was 5 and this is all I had. My ghost was a cartoon. The point here is that we use anecdotes. Anecdotes are powerful. Stories are powerful. We trust our experiences and we trust other people, especially when they tell us these emotional stories. And again, like my story, I think is pretty convincing. I know somebody, I could say, who had a vaccine and then got very sick. I could say that I know UFOs are real because I saw one. All of these are anecdotes. And so we need to remember that they are never sufficient. And the more extraordinary the claim, the more extraordinary the evidence. And then finally, we get to replicability. In that, evidence for a claim should be able to be repeated. For those of you who do not know, so this is really concerning. The claim that autism is caused by vaccines is a claim that sort of refuses to die. It originated from this man here, Andrew Wakefield. In the late 90s, there was an increase in autism, a documented increase in autism, and people started to become more aware of it. And scientists were trying to figure out what was causing autism. And Wakefield was a gastroenterologist, and he did a study on, there were 12 kids at his clinic that he measured their levels of gut inflammation and asked the parents about when they became symptomatic of developmental disabilities and when they had gotten the MMR trivalent vaccine. And from this study, he said that it was the trivalent vaccine that was causing the increase in autism. And so he held that was published in The Lancet, which is a great journal. He held a press conference here telling parents to not use the trivalent vaccine. So instead do individual vaccines and space them out. Now, reality is what it is, and science is a process of trying to understand reality. So other scientists, if in fact vaccines cause autism, or specifically the MMR trivalent vaccine causes autism, we should be able to replicate those results. So other scientists tried to. And there were studies on hundreds of thousands and then millions of kids, and none of them could replicate this finding. So a journalist went digging and found that Wakefield was being paid by a law firm, and he was trying to develop an alternate vaccine. And also those 12 kids, he had actually fudged some of that data. His original study has now been retracted. From this study, we have nearly all of modern anti-vaccine sentiment. Anti-vaccine goes back as far as vaccines, to be fair, but the modern movement can really be traced back to Wakefield. Wakefield then, because of he had conflicts of interest that he didn't declare, and he lied, which fraud is, the F word in science is a career killer. He lost his medical license. He is no longer Dr. Wakefield. He still goes around the United States telling people not to vaccinate their kids. Kennedy now is his anti-vaccine sentiment also traces back to this. There was one study with 12 kids that was fraudulent that found a link, and nothing else has been able to. The point here is that if reality is what it is, if our results aren't consistent, something is wrong. It's either a coincidence, an error, which can happen, or fraud. So can we repeat it? Now, there are different forms of replicability. Some are, can we do the same thing the same way and come up with the same results? But others are, no matter what the conclusion is, no matter how we look at that conclusion or test it, we should be able to find the same, we should be able to get to the same conclusion. I said that very clunkily, but I hope you understand. Here, for example, is lines of evidence for a warming world. Our understanding of climate change does not come from a single study on even increased air temperatures. It comes from multiple lines of evidence, not only from different satellites and their recordings, so those are repeated, but we also have it reproduced in things like warming ocean levels and reduced ice and earlier springs and later falls and so on. So we can have the most certainty in conclusions that have been repeated and replicated and are supported from multiple lines of evidence. We should be the most skeptical of conclusions that have not been repeated. So more information is available on my website. I communicate a lot online and would love to have supportive followers. So if you're on any of these social media channels, I would love to have you. My site, by the way, is based on the premise that we often say that knowledge is power, but there's too much to know. And we carry access to basically all of humanity's knowledge in our pockets. So the question is, when you need to make a decision, can you find reliable information and think about it in a way that helps you make better decisions? So that said, thank you very much, and thank you to FACT, and I will take any questions that you have.
Okay. Oh, okay. Can everybody hear me? Oh, I have one more thing on my screen I have to get rid of. Okay, which actually happens to be the list of questions. Melanie, thank you so much. I am a retired teacher, and you're making me really sorry that I can't get back in the classroom and use this, but it's been a long time. That was excellent. We always hope that facts and information will result in rational decisions and policies, and wow. Today in the Philadelphia Inquirer, hold on, please. Sorry. There was an article, this isn't real, it's everything is science actually, but there was an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer. The University of Penn is holding in their collection a pair of gloves that some provenance suggests belong to Shakespeare. So they're examining that, and it's Penn, so I hope they will be very scientific about it. All right, let me get these questions back up. Aha. Okay. I'm sorry, this takes a minute. Okay. Somebody said, have you heard that there are more people who believe that Earth is flat today than in the 19th century? And to that, my question is, what's the proof for that? But have you heard that?
I have not heard that. I'd be curious if that's in sheer numbers or in a percentage.
Yes.
There should not be anyone today who actually thinks the Earth is flat. A great documentary, if you're curious about learning more about flat Earth and the kinds of reasoning involved in that community and why they believe those things, is Behind the Curve. It's on Netflix and it is absolutely wonderful.
Good to know. Good to know. One of our members wants to know the leading forms of nonsense that are affecting your students. Like, what do they bring into the classroom and ask you about?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm in Massachusetts, and so I don't tend to have a lot of evolution denial or climate change denial. I do tend to have a lot of ghost beliefs.
Oh.
I have a lot of immigrant students, and so actually I love the conversation because when we talk about ghosts and the ways that we can fool ourselves, I actually tell a story of how ghosts have changed throughout time and actually are even different across cultures today. And so my students, because they're from all these different places, will tell me what ghosts are like in their culture. And then we get to talk about the implications of that. Like if something happens to humans after we die, we would expect our, just like humans, we're consistent, so our ghosts should be consistent. But the fact that they're not suggests that they're more likely a figment of our cultural influences.
Yeah.
And I do tend to have some conspiratorial beliefs too.
Yeah, I can imagine it. It's a cultural thing. I found I taught high school, but I also was an adjunct at a community college, and I taught general psychology, which is very broad, but I did work critical thinking into it. And I also talked to my friends who were my age about it, and I found my students much more open to it. What's been your experience?
I would agree. Yeah. Okay. So I spend a lot of time now on identifying misinformation and communicating how misinformation works. And so protecting people from misinformation. And the one thing that I have found to be nearly universal is that people believe misinformation is an other people problem. In that, can you believe what they fall for? Wow, they're so stupid. But the longer I continue those conversations, the more likely I am to get to a form of misinformation that they think is true. And you can see it like, oh, wait a minute, but that's true. I wouldn't fall for misinformation.
Like all the people who think they would never fall for a scam,
Exactly.
who do, and I'm one of them. No, I wouldn't. That would never do that. Do your okay? I see some of these questions, and I'm going to make it a little more general. Do your students report changing their opinions? Like, do you get those aha moments where you can see them turning a corner?
Yes. But it's a process.
Oh,
And I think this is really important. When I do this in class, I start with witchcraft, like
aha.
in witch trials from 18th and 17th centuries. I purposefully start with things that are not triggering to students. I call them critical thinking training wheels. So
Oh.
with information that's not triggering, I teach them how they think, what they believe in, why, and how to evaluate information before accepting it. And I do it in a way where it's always easier to spot bad reasoning in other people than it is ourselves. So I externalize it first, and then I start to introduce it to them, but on things that they don't really care about, and then slowly work up. And so by the end of the semester, students will say, wow, yeah, I used to believe it. And they'll even apply it to things that I didn't cover, which makes me so happy.
Yeah. Yes. I'm going to take us back to the question about flat Earth, because I couldn't think of the guy. Once we started having Zoom meetings, we truly had speakers from around the world, including Australia, which that poor guy, I think, had to get up at 4 a.m. to talk to us at 2. But we also had Michael Marshall from the Merseyside Skeptics, and he works for the Good Thinking Society, which is somewhere in England. And he's somebody on the board here help me out. I'm pretty sure he's the one who talked to us about a flat Earth group that he got involved with, trying to reason with them. And I'm sorry now that I don't remember more about it, but there's more of those people than we'd like to think. A couple of our board members, I'm having a little trouble with the scrolling function here, so I'm really sorry, but I think Eric Krieg and possibly Bob Glickman on our board and founders of this group went around and did talks to junior high school groups. And they would talk about, oh, the one you just mentioned. I'm sorry, I'm getting older and my mind is not as clear. The fake pills that are primarily water, homeopathy. I knew it would come to me. So they would take bottles of homeopathic pills or liquid in and just drink a couple bottles or eat a whole bottle of homeopathic sleeping pills. And here I am 20 minutes later and I'm not asleep yet. I should be really sleepy. So yeah. And I remember when I found out they were doing that, I said, you don't know how they've been processed. They could have mercury in, they could have bacteria in, and viruses and mold. And a couple years ago, I started reading that, yeah, they were having that. So I'm not sure what I expected you to say about that, but you're very patient.
No, you're right. I find homeopathy one of the purest forms of health pseudoscience that a lot of people have never really thought about.
I know.
When I communicate about homeopathy online, there are definitely some people who are really triggered by it. But I find that the vast majority of people are like, wait, really? That's what that is? How can they do that?
Yeah.
They just don't know.
Yeah. Yes. And I've had those conversations too. And then I've had, and truly, my friends are tired of hearing from me about this stuff. They just, yeah. But there are people that just fall back. I know you know this and say, but it worked for me.
Yeah.
So, somebody wrote, yeah, didn't some people lose their sense of smell after taking homeopathic products adulterated with real levels of chemicals, possibly zinc or something else?
I know there was like 10 or 12 babies that I think died from homeopathic teething aids that were improperly, it was belladonna.
Oh, oh,
Yeah.
isn't that a poison?
I mean, yeah, but that's what homeopathy often is. If so belladonna might cause symptoms like nausea or pain or fever or whatever it is. And so if we dilute belladonna, it will treat those symptoms.
Right.
But belladonna is so that logic is terrible logic, I should say. But
Yeah.
then even more, they don't improper if they're not properly diluted, then what you have is a poison solution. And
Mhm.
homeopathy isn't regulated like pharmaceuticals, so we don't necessarily know what's in it. And only after it causes those issues is it potentially recalled.
Right. Right. Yes. When the bodies start piling up, then they'll look into it. Okay, I'm going to read this question and it's kind of a long one, so do your best with it. Do you ever think about the reasons we want to follow simple, low-proof explanations? Don't we require heuristics to reduce the cognitive load? This one just disappeared. I'm sorry. Again, having trouble with the scrolling function. And this was from Aaron. Aaron, I'm sorry. It was a good question.
Am I Aaron?
It's one of our members. It's yeah, who typed it in, and I'm just explaining to him because
I can read the whole thing. Do you ever think about the reasons we want to follow simple, low-proof explanations? Don't we require heuristics to reduce cognitive load, as it's unrealistic to expect people to spend 10 hours a day creating science-centric reasoning?
Yeah, there's a reason heuristics evolved. If we weren't able to make fast decisions, then we would just be paralyzed and not be able to actually act.
right.
Heuristics are obviously good enough, or we would be dead. The problem is that heuristics don't always, we haven't evolved heuristics as a way to find the truth, but to survive. And so I think understanding what the brain is doing is really key here. So it's metacognition, being aware of what your brain is doing, recognizing that it jumped to a conclusion, and asking yourself, is the evidence in support of this conclusion? We can teach our brain to make different heuristics. So people who are professionals in certain areas have practiced enough so that they have reliable heuristics, mostly reliable heuristics. And also, the heuristic of an expert consensus is actually a pretty useful one, which is actually why a lot of science denial campaigns focus on confusing people about what the consensus is. Like most of us trust experts. I don't have the time or energy to learn absolutely everything. When my toilet is clogged, I'm going to call a plumber. When I'm sick, I'm going to go to a medical doctor. And so we trust experts. In order to convince people that the consensus is wrong, what they have to, or to not accept a consensus, what they tend to do is confuse us about the existence of a consensus. And so understanding yourself and what kinds of things you want or don't want to believe, and then recognizing that the expert consensus is the most reliable that we're going to be able to have at any given moment are key here. But to get to the bedrock of your question, yes, heuristics are useful. We need heuristics, but they're not necessarily helping us define the truth. So recognizing when it's time to turn on the part of our brain that questions them, that's using them.
Got it. Thank you. And thank you, Wes, because I still haven't found that. Gabe Goldberg suggested a book, which I wrote it down. I'm going to the library tomorrow. How to Talk to a Science Denier. Chapter 1 describes a flat Earth conference. So yeah, they are out there.
That is my my colleague and friend Lee McIntyre, who is wonderful. If I add something to your list there, David McRaney has a wonderful book called How Minds Change.
I am writing it down. Thank you. Okay, and now I found Aaron's question. Yeah, I don't need it now, but thank you. Okay, 3 new messages. Hold on. Somebody else is listing a book. I think it was Bob Glickman, one of our founders, who said some water has very unpleasant memories.
The homeopathy only remembers the good stuff.
Right. Oh. That sounds like Bob too.
Love it.
Yeah, somebody else wrote, shows promoting the paranormal on the History Channel are a disgrace. Yes, they are. Yes, they
add another follow to all of you. If you are on social media, I highly recommend you following Kenny Biddle.
Yes, we know Kenny.
Kenny is wonderful. Kenny will, he actually just stayed at a haunted house this last weekend. I've stayed at haunted houses with Kenny. We have never found a ghost, shockingly, but he does such a great job of breaking down the kinds of people who are ghost hunting. I don't shows because that's often for Hollywood and for views. But people who are ghost hunting think they're using science. They're using tools that are science-y, like they're electric or they go off or there's doodads or look, there's a picture, so there's something. So it feels like science. And that's the thing about pseudoscience is that we believe it because we want to. So recognizing what you want to believe. Now, Kenny does a great job then because he'll actually use science-based methods to try and figure out if a haunting is real. And one of my favorite things that he does is like he'll take TikTok videos or Instagram videos of supposed hauntings and recreate them using not hauntings. Know how this trick is done, and it's so much fun. I have, spoiler alert, I have done a few of those with Kenny, and they are a riot.
Yeah, he is a really interesting person. He came to FACT and spoke, 20 or more years ago.
Wow.
And yes, and it was one of the first times he had ever spoken in front of a group, and he was nervous, but he was very good, very organized, and very good. And then we didn't hear from him, and then he started coming to meetings again, and he got more involved in all of this. And yeah, he's amazing, and he deserves that job he got up there in the coldest part of New York.
He does. Yes, he does.
Okay, Eric said he had his Boy Scout troop make orb pictures using dust as a haunted historic. Yeah, in a haunted. Yeah, that was the first thing that Kenny spoke to in our group was, what are these artifacts and pictures that people think are ghosts?
Actually, can I just piggyback on that for a second? Because I love that comment. When I teach my students about misinformation, one of the things that I do is I have them create misinformation so that they learn of it. So it's like a child watching a magic trick. So you could child, it's not magic. You could show them how the trick was done, or you could teach them how to do the trick. And by teaching them how to do the trick, then they recognize, well, that's just something that I could do.
Yeah.
So for example, I don't know if everybody saw my cup here. No, birds aren't real. This is a satirical conspiracy theory that claims that the government killed all of the birds in the 60s and 70s and replaced them with drones to spy on us. So, you know how like birds are on power lines? It's because they're charging up. Or when they poop on your car, they're tracking you. So brilliant. And that's how conspiratorial thinking works. There's always an excuse for evidence. So I teach my students how to be conspiracy theorists. I use this conspiracy theory and I say, okay, now make your own silly, obviously the non-triggering example. We're in the training wheels thing. So create your own, and then I have them get with another group and they try and defend their conspiracy. So, well, yeah, but what about that bird that I shot and ate? Oh, well, that's the government great things with fake meat these days, that kind of stuff. So you have to always make an excuse. And that's how conspiratorial thinking works. So it's a game. They learn how it works. And then in real life, when you show somebody a picture of, look at this ghost photo, like those are just orbs. I've taken pictures of that. I know how that works. Love it.
That is excellent. Excellent. Gabe Goldberg also suggested Skeptical Inquirer magazine, which I think probably everybody in fact and most skeptical groups is aware of. It's amazing. And that's Kenny Biddle is working up there now. Correct
Floater?
me, yes, please.
No, he is. He's at the Center for Inquiry. I'm a fellow there as well. Floater was published in Skeptical Inquirer. It was one of the cover stories like last year, the year before.
I have a stack of them I have to go back through.
Like if you're not subscribing to Skeptical Inquirer, do it now.
Yes, it's just excellent. Somebody asked, what has been your experience attending conferences for science educators? Have you attended those?
A lot of conferences for science educators. So I tend to present on teaching critical thinking the way that I focus on critical thinking. Most educators and their standards focus on critical thinking like problem solving as opposed to an awareness, metacognition and skepticism and humility and so on. So I focus on that. I do floater, inoculation exercises like teaching students to create misinformation. I do a lot of work with educators, and educators love this stuff. The problem is that their classes are full. Their is full. There are things they have to cover, and asking them to add something else is a bit of a heavy lift. So I create lessons and activities that make it as easy as possible, but also asking educators to also learn, well, how science denial works. They're a biology teacher. They don't know how science denial works or how pseudoscience works or conspiracy theories. So I try to provide them with that background content as well so they feel comfortable enough teaching it in their classes. I also have, I've worked with the Center for Inquiry, the education.
Your screen just froze.
Oh, sorry, is this better?
Yeah, but we lost about probably 15, 20 seconds of what you said. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I don't know where that was. Let me just, I also work with the Center for Inquiry's education director, Vasquez, to, because I create these short social media videos about these kinds of concepts. And we have organized them into a series of bell ringers for teachers. as a way to provide a easy way to get this kind of content into their classes without having them add something else.
Mhm. Good. I went, and I hope things have changed. This was 23 years ago when I was first involved with FACT. I went with another board member to the Pennsylvania Science Teachers Conference, Pennsylvania now, in Harrisburg. We went out, stayed overnight, had a table for FACT. We're talking to science teachers, but from Pennsylvania. Now, I'm a Pennsylvania girl myself. I live in New Jersey, but I grew up in Pennsylvania, so I really don't mean to sound like I'm making fun of people. But when we talked to them, there were science teachers from Pennsylvania who were very disturbed by the thought of evolution.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I spoke at Pennsylvania Science Teachers last year. It was like, and I was just at the New York one and the national one this last month.
Mm-hmm.
And I do run into that.
Yeah.
Which is why there are so many great organizations that are focusing on these types of misinformation, primarily evolution and climate change, and I think more and more on things like vaccines. There's some on things like GMOs and so on.
Uh-huh.
But if I were to go into a classroom and say and start with something like evolution, I'm going to trigger students who have that belief that's important to them, which is why I think starting with the training wheels approach is really important. Educators themselves don't tend to have a lot of background content knowledge, and they don't necessarily have the kinds of understanding of why we fall for things and our vulnerabilities to misinformation and how those types of misinformation work. So it would be my hope, and I don't know this for sure, but it would be my hope that the way that I try and approach this at these conferences helps reach those teachers who themselves might have issues. I do tend more to find teachers who are concerned about their students not accepting evolution. And so the ways that I'm trying to approach them are helpful for them.
Mm-hmm.
I would hope it would be for the teachers as well.
Yes. Okay, let me see. Okay, another question. Isn't there a real challenge that much of science and medicine is built through peer review and grant funding? And I just scrolled down too far and that's not much to respond to there.
Oh, I found it, which has major
Oh.
education
Yeah.
and
Yes, good, excellent.
Yeah, scientists do have to fund their research. And so knowing who is funding research is important. And research that will have more economic benefit tends to be funded more than other types of research. Like there isn't a lot of research into something like the types of fungi in Pennsylvania than there is pharmaceuticals. But as far as like, I hear that sometimes from the concern about the influence of money in terms of scientific findings being tainted somehow. And the problem with that, I think it is possible, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about science is that it is an attempt to understand the world, and it is done in a community. Another book to add to your list, if you are interested, Naomi Oreskes has a great book, Why Trust Science. She was the science historian who helped to document the fossil fuel industry and the tobacco industry's campaigns of science denial. And she has a more recent book on why trust science. And in it, she talks about science it's a community endeavor. It is experts who are collectively evaluating and scrutinizing evidence. the incentives are there for scientists to make a name for yourself.
Mm.
The best way to do that is to disprove longstanding conclusions or to find something new. It's not to say, yeah, but they also said this.
Yeah.
And so because of that, if there is a reality out there to be found, the incentive structure is there for scientists to break that ground. But the evidence has to be there. In the short term, people can lie. There can be coincidences, there can be error, but it comes out in the wash in the end.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. And I guess this is a heuristic of mine that if anybody is coming out and saying something that counters the currently accepted science, I'm always going to say, nah, just wait. That's pretty much what you just said. Because
Yeah.
if it is true, I mean, there's a doctor out there now, and well, Gundry is his name. I was going to say, I don't want to say his name. He's all over the internet. And he gives people nutrition advice. And among it, there's something about don't eat brown rice. Brown rice is bad for you. Have you heard of, you familiar
No.
with him?
No.
Yeah. And just, okay, he's been saying it for a long time and nobody else is agreeing with him. But then we had the guys, and I don't remember the names. I remember when I was a kid, my best friend's parents both had ulcers, stomach ulcers. I'm going back to the 60s. And they were living on Mylanta and these bland diets. And of course, it never worked. And then there were a couple doctors, I think from Australia, who said, I think this is actually a bacterial infection. And one of them gave himself ulcers by swallowing the kind of bacteria he thought it was. He got ulcers. He then cured it with antibiotics. And, of course, that was against all the science that people believed about ulcers at that time. But guess what? That's what it is. Helicobacter, I think it is the name of it. I'm getting some of this really wrong.
No, H. pylori, absolutely.
Yes.
It's
Okay.
how a scientific consensus is overturned. What I
Yes.
communicating science is that people will often point to the few examples of a consensus being overturned for justification for not accepting a current consensus.
Uh-huh.
And they'll even compare themselves to Galileo or something.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Who was that woman who's in jail now?
No, who? Who in jail?
Oh, help me out here. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's not enough to be compared to Galileo. You have to be right.
Yeah. Well, the thing about Galileo is that he was actually in line with a lot of astronomers' thinking at the time. He wasn't completely opposed to the current consensus.
Mm-hmm.
He was just willing to speak out about it. And he also pissed off the church. So he went after the Pope. And so they went after him. And they accused him of heresy and prosecuted him. And so science deniers will compare themselves to Galileo, where
You're frozen again. We're not
remember
hearing you.
Galileo isn't because he opposed a scientific consensus. It was, oh crap. I don't, is this any better? Is it better now?
Yeah, it is. It is a
Hello?
little better. Yeah, we're
I'm
here.
so yeah, the reason that we remember Galileo isn't because he opposed a consensus. It's because he was right and he had evidence.
Mhm.
And importantly, it wasn't scientists who persecuted him.
It was the church.
Because they did not want to accept the implications of the Earth not being at the center of the universe. It was ideologically motivated. So science deniers compare themselves to Galileo, but they're much more aligned with the ideologically motivated church. The thing about a consensus, yes, consensus can be wrong. But at any given moment, the consensus is the best that we have.
Right.
Almost certainly is not going to be a non-expert that finds flaws with a consensus. It's going to be another expert, and you got to bring evidence.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And a few minutes ago, when I said that woman that went to jail, which was way too vague, She was the one who started the company that was going to do 100 different blood tests using a couple drops of blood. I can't think of the name of the company. I cannot think of her name, but she was another person who said, you know, they criticized Galileo, they criticized, you know, these other people, and she was comparing herself to them. Theranos, somebody just Theranos. And I can't, so Jim, do you remember her name? Because she got about a 10 or 11-year sentence. She she fought it for several years and got married and had a couple babies, and Elizabeth Holmes. Yes.
Yep.
Yes. That was, and I remember the first time I heard it, I thought, I'm not a doctor, but I don't think you can do that. But there were so many people who were just the basis, you know, the very basics of critical thinking, they failed.
But it would be awesome.
Pardon me?
It would be awesome.
Yeah, well, sure, it would be awesome. Yeah.
I think what led a lot of people to falling for it. You want it to be true.
Yeah. I hear that a lot. Concerning the brown rice, somebody typed in, is it possible that brown rice has a higher mercury level? And then somebody else said the water you cook it in has bad memories. So a serious statement and a not so serious statement. But that particular doctor has a lot of nutritional advice that isn't horrible, but it's not in line with what other people are saying, and he's not really showing any evidence. So anyway, Melanie, thank you so much for your time on what I know is an extremely busy schedule for you. Thank you so, so much. And let me find, I have a couple other things I have to say.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Oh.
Problems and for my cat.
Oh, we love the cat. That was not a problem. I want to make everybody aware that Melanie's talk and most of our previous talks over the past 5, 6, 7 years, I don't know, are available on YouTube for free. Our YouTube, somebody counted it up this morning. Our YouTube videos collectively have over 10,000 views. So they're very popular, and anybody who comes, yeah, we don't get any money on it. No, it's not monetized in any way. And there's not any one video that's getting all of that, but it's out there for you. It is out there for you. And Bob Glickman, are you available? Are you unmuted? Our president, Bob Glickman, would like to say a few words before we finish today. Let's see if he's here.